My name is Amelia Carter, and at 35 years old, I became something I never thought possible, a self-made billionaire. Last year, I sold my wellness tech company, NeuroWell, for $850 million. It still feels surreal sometimes, especially when I remember the girl I used to be, the quiet one in the background, the dependable daughter, the sister who worked harder while others shined brighter. I wasn't the beautiful one, or the charming one, or the favorite child, but what I lacked in spotlight, I made up for in grit. Every late night spent coding. Every odd job I worked to stay afloat. Every rejection I endured, it all built the foundation of the empire that changed my life. And yet, even with all of that success, I had no idea the people I trusted most, my husband and my sister, would one day betray me in a way that nearly cost me everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. From the outside, my life looked enviable. I was married to Jonathan Hayes, a man who seemed to be the perfect partner. He was a tall, polished venture capitalist with an easy smile and an old money confidence that drew people in. Jonathan swept me off my feet from the very beginning, showing up at my conferences, sending me flowers, and treating me like I was the most important person in any room. For someone who had spent her life being overlooked in favor of others, especially my younger sister, his attention felt intoxicating. He was charming, ambitious, and always seemed to say exactly what I wanted to hear. I thought I had found not only a husband, but also a true ally, someone who believed in me and my vision. But if Jonathan was the polished charmer who made me feel seen, then Rachel, my younger sister, was the opposite, yet in her own way. She had always been the star. Rachel was the one who drew people in without even trying. She was stunning, magnetic, and charismatic. The kind of woman who could walk into any room and instantly command attention. From childhood on, it was clear she had a special glow. She wasn't just loved, she was adored. My parents beamed at her school plays, her pageant wins, her endless stream of admirers. Meanwhile, I earned quiet nods of approval for my academic achievements. I don't think my parents ever meant to hurt me, but there was always this unspoken truth. Rachel was easier to love. Even as adults, that dynamic never really went away. Rachel bounced from one dream to another, first modeling, then acting, then influencing, but money was always tight. She struggled to find direction, yet somehow, people, especially my parents, always believed she'd land on her feet. Whenever she couldn't pay her rent, whenever her car broke down, whenever life got messy, I was the one who wired her money, who stepped in to fix it. She used to call me her safety net, and maybe part of me accepted that role, because I wanted to believe she'd do the same for me if I ever needed her. Looking back now, that belief feels almost laughable. I spent my life thinking family was unshakable, that no matter how different Rachel and I were, we'd always protect each other. What I didn't know then was that both she and Jonathan, the two people I trusted most, were already weaving a plan that would make me question everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family. Growing up in Seattle, my life always felt like two parallel tracks, one for me, and one for Rachel. From as far back as I can remember, our paths were different. I was the serious one, the girl who loved books more than parties, who found comfort in quiet corners of the library while my peers were sneaking out to football games or high school dances. Rachel, on the other hand, was the light in every room. She had a laugh that turned heads, a smile that could melt resistance, and an energy that made people want to follow her wherever she went. It was clear, even in our earliest years, that the world responded to us differently. When Rachel performed in her first elementary school play, our parents beamed like they'd just discovered Broadway's next star. My mother filmed every second, clapping with tears in her eyes, while my father brought flowers as if she'd just won an Oscar. I still remember sitting next to him, clutching a ribbon I'd won in a local science fair earlier that week. He'd congratulated me, of course, but with none of the same excitement, none of that pure, unfiltered pride he reserved for Rachel. That became the pattern of our lives. Rachel's victories were celebrated with parades, while mine were quietly acknowledged with a pat on the back. I don't think they meant to make me feel less seen. They were good parents in many ways, stable, supportive in their own way, always encouraging education. But Rachel's shine was simply easier to recognize. Beauty pageants, talent shows, cheerleading, endless boyfriends leaving notes in her locker, her achievements were loud, visible, and easy to cheer for. Mine? My victories lived in numbers, equations, and lines of code on a screen. My achievements weren't glamorous, but they were real. Still, the message I internalized was simple. Rachel was the one to brag about, I was the one to rely on. The first time I touched a computer, I was 12 years old. It was an old, clunky desktop my parents had bought secondhand for family use. In reality, no one touched it but me. Rachel hated it. She'd roll her eyes at me, sitting for hours, typing commands, playing with simple programs, and later teaching myself basic coding. For me, that machine wasn't just a toy, it was a portal into a world where I finally felt powerful, finally in control of something. My computer science teacher, Mr. Jameson, noticed my fascination. He started giving me extra assignments, things beyond the curriculum. One day, he pulled me aside and said, "Amelia, your brain works differently. You don't just learn technology, you see possibilities in it. Don't waste that." Those words stuck with me for years. They became my anchor, the thing I repeated to myself whenever I felt overshadowed at home. Because make no mistake, being Rachel's sister was like living in a constant eclipse. She wasn't cruel, not at first, but she understood her power, even as a teenager. She knew that with a bat of her eyelashes or a few tears, she could get what she wanted. And more often than not, I was the one who made it happen. Our parents didn't have much money. They were both public school teachers, hardworking and dedicated, but raising two daughters in Seattle wasn't cheap. When it came time for college, that reality hit us hard. I got into the University of Washington for computer science, a dream come true, but I knew immediately the burden would fall on me. Scholarships covered part of it, but the rest? I worked for morning shifts at a coffee shop, afternoons shelving books at the university library, weekends doing IT support for local businesses. I barely slept during those years, surviving on caffeine and stubbornness, coding late into the night in my cramped apartment. Rachel's story looked very different. She got into a communications program at a private college in California, but instead of juggling 3 jobs, she had my parents draining their savings to support her. I never complained, not out loud. I told myself she deserved it, that she needed help more than I did. But deep down, a small, bitter seed planted itself. Why was it always me who had to scrape by while Rachel was given lifelines at every turn? Why did everyone assume I could handle the weight alone? Rachel's college years were a blur of sororities, parties, and boyfriends who came and went like seasons. She'd call me late at night, crying about rent she couldn't pay or a car she couldn't fix, and I already stretched thin always found a way to send her something. "You're my safety net, Amy," she'd say, using the nickname only she got away with. At the time, I thought it was endearing, even sweet. Now, looking back, I see it for what it was, an early sign of the dependency that would define our adult relationship. The imbalance wasn't just financial, it was emotional. Rachel was used to being rescued. And I was used to rescuing. That dynamic followed us everywhere, shaping the roles we played in each other's lives. She was the damsel in distress. I was the reliable problem solver. It was a script we both accepted, though only one of us truly benefited from it. By the time I graduated, I was exhausted but determined. I had an idea, an algorithm I'd been quietly building in between shifts and classes. I dreamed of creating technology that could read human emotions through digital patterns, something people said was impossible. That stubbornness, the refusal to believe in impossible, became the fuel of my career. But even as I pushed forward, Rachel's world seemed to fall further into chaos. Modeling gigs that never panned out. Acting auditions that ended in rejection. Relationships that turned toxic every time she came back to me. And every time, I opened my wallet and my heart, telling myself, "She's my sister. What else can I do?" I see now that I wasn't just her sister, I was her provider. Without even realizing it, I had become the net that caught her every fall, the steady ground beneath her shaky steps. And the more she leaned on me, the more everyone else expected me to hold it all together. My parents would call and say things like, "Can you help Rachel just this once?" As if just once didn't happen every other month. And I said yes, every single time. It became the story of our lives. Rachel shining brightly but burning out fast, and me, always in the background, rebuilding, supporting, and sacrificing. What I didn't understand then but would one day come to know in the most devastating way was that this imbalance wasn't just a childhood dynamic. It wasn't just about money or family favoritism. It was training for betrayal. Because the more you carry someone, the easier it becomes for them to believe you'll never let them fall. And when money and power enter the picture, that belief can turn dangerous. That was the foundation of my relationship with Rachel. Love laced with obligation, loyalty shadowed by resentment. I thought the bond of blood would always protect me. But what I couldn't see through years of conditioning was that dependency can curdle into entitlement. And entitlement, in the wrong hands, can turn deadly. After college, I stepped into the working world with nothing but a degree, 3 years of exhaustion carved into my face, and an idea that refused to leave me alone. While my peers joined established companies or pursued graduate school, I couldn't stop thinking about the algorithm I had been building in the shadows of my overstuffed schedule. The idea was deceptively simple. What if technology could understand how we feel? Not just what we type, or what we say, but the deeper emotions beneath those words. I called it an emotional intelligence interface, something that could read subtle cues in text, voice tone, and online behavior to detect stress, anxiety, even early signs of depression. Of course, everyone thought I was out of my mind. It's too abstract. Too risky. Too ambitious. For someone with no business background. Those were the kinds of things I heard in meeting after meeting. Investors would smile politely at my demos, lean forward with interest when the prototype responded to a user's anxious message with uncanny accuracy, then lean back and shake their heads. Too soon. Too untested. Too you. That was the unspoken barrier. I wasn't just pitching a revolutionary idea. I was asking them to believe in me, a young woman with no pedigree, no Silicon Valley connections, no wealthy family backing me up. So I funded it myself. I emptied my small savings account, about $60,000 scraped together over years of jobs, and registered the company as Neurawell. For 2 years, I ran it out of my cramped apartment, surviving on instant noodles and sheer stubbornness. There were nights I thought I'd lose my mind, staring at screens until dawn, debugging until my vision blurred. There were weeks when rent felt impossible, when I thought about giving up and taking a normal job, just to have some peace. But then came the breakthrough. One of our beta tests was run with a social platform whose users were struggling with online bullying. Neurawell's algorithm flagged several posts as signs of early suicidal ideation, catching them days before the human moderators would have noticed. That pilot didn't just validate my work, it saved lives. Suddenly, the calls started coming to me. Wellness companies, mental health providers, even cautious investors who had once dismissed me were now desperate to sit at my table. Within 18 months, Neurawell grew from a team of 3 exhausted engineers to over 100 employees. Our valuation skyrocketed to $50 million. That's when he appeared, Jonathan Hayes. Jonathan was the kind of man you noticed before he even said a word. Tall, immaculately dressed, and carrying himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never worried about bills or rent checks in his life. He was a venture capitalist from an old money family, specializing in AI startups. At first, I dismissed him as just another slick investor who would pat me on the head and tell me how impressive my little company was before moving on to a founder who looked more like him. But Jonathan was different, or at least, he knew how to make himself seem that way. He approached me after one of my conference presentations, not with condescension but with thoughtful questions about the long-term applications of Neurawell. He wasn't distracted, he wasn't dismissive, he looked directly at me, as if my ideas mattered. I had spent years in rooms full of men who talked over me, stole credit, or treated me like a novelty. Jonathan leaned in, listened, and made me feel seen. After that, he became persistent. Flowers arrived at my office after big milestones. He'd show up at industry events where I was speaking, always accidentally running into me. He'd invite me to dinners, then to lunches, then to coffee. At first, I resisted. Dating had never been my priority. I was too busy building something that might collapse at any moment. But Jonathan had this way of making me laugh when I was most stressed. Of reminding me I was more than just my work. On our 3rd date, when he kissed me outside a restaurant in San Francisco, I felt a rush of emotions I hadn't let myself feel in years. Our relationship moved at lightning speed. Within months, Jonathan was everywhere in my life, helping with strategy, introducing me to his network, whispering encouragement in my ear before investor pitches. I didn't notice, or didn't want to notice, how easily he slid into roles I hadn't invited him into. At the time, all I saw was support, partnership, Love. 8 months later, we were married. A small ceremony on the California coast, just close friends and family. The ocean stretched out behind us. Waves crashing against rocks like nature's applause. Jonathan looked perfect in his tailored suit, his smile, easy and warm. And Rachel, my maid of honor, stood beside me, tears in her eyes as she hugged me after the vows. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Amy," she whispered. For a moment, I believed her. For a moment, it felt like the competitive undercurrent that had always pulsed between us had vanished, replaced by sisterly love. I should have paid more attention to the way Jonathan's hand lingered a little too long on Rachel's arm when he thanked her. To the fleeting glances between them during the reception, quickly covered by laughter. To the way Rachel's smile seemed just a bit too fixed, her compliments just a bit too rehearsed. But I didn't see it then, or maybe, I didn't want to. After years of carrying the weight of everything alone, I wanted to believe I finally had a husband who adored me and a sister who supported me. I wanted to believe I was no longer just the provider, the safety net. Looking back, I realize how naive that was. The foundation of my marriage was already compromised, and I didn't even know it. Jonathan, with his polished charm and carefully timed affection, wasn't just a husband, he was a strategist. And Rachel, who had grown used to leaning on me for everything, wasn't just a sister anymore, she was a liability. Together, they would one day become something far darker. But on that wedding day, standing barefoot on a sandy cliff with the Pacific wind in my hair, I felt only hope. I thought I was stepping into a new chapter, one where love and family would finally stand beside me instead of weighing me down. I didn't know then that I had just walked into the most dangerous partnership of my life. When I signed the deal selling Neurowell for $850 million, the world seemed to explode around me. Overnight, I went from being the scrappy founder who'd hustled her way through countless sleepless nights, to one of the wealthiest women in the country. The congratulations poured in. Journalists wanted interviews. Old acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered my number. It was dizzying. Jonathan handled it all like he'd been preparing his entire life. He threw a lavish celebration at our new San Francisco mansion, a sprawling estate overlooking the bay with glass walls, marble floors, and views so stunning they almost felt unreal. Friends, investors, and industry insiders filled the house that night, raising champagne glasses to toast our success. Jonathan was the perfect host, charming everyone, shaking hands, telling jokes, making sure the cameras caught his arm around me every time someone snapped a photo. I should have been elated. I should have been floating on air, knowing that every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every rejection, had finally paid off. And for a while, I was. But in the middle of that glittering evening, as laughter echoed across the mansion and music pulsed through the air, I noticed something that made me pause. Jonathan and Rachel were standing together near the piano. Their heads leaned in close, whispering, smiling in a way that suggested more than casual conversation. It was fleeting so quick I might have imagined it, but my stomach tightened. Rachel had flown in from Los Angeles for the party, her modeling career once again on pause. She looked radiant in a sequined dress, soaking in attention as easily as breathing. Jonathan touched her arm as they laughed, and when he noticed me watching, he shifted seamlessly, moving across the room to refill someone's drink. I shook it off. I told myself I was imagining things. It was a celebration, after all. And Jonathan had always been generous with his warmth. Still, the image stuck with me like a thorn, nagging quietly at the edges of my mind. In the weeks after the sale, life shifted in ways I didn't fully understand. Jonathan started traveling more often. Business trips, he'd explain, vague about the details, always promising to tell me more later. His morning texts, once filled with sweetness and encouragement, became sparse. His phone calls moved into other rooms. When I asked, he'd smile and brush it off. "You've always said finance bored you, Amelia. Trust me to handle this part." How? And Rachel? What was supposed to be a brief visit stretched into weeks, then months. She claimed the modeling industry was dead, that she just needed time to figure out her next move. I didn't mind at first. Part of me hoped this was a chance for us to reconnect, now that the old childhood competition was behind us. I had enough money for both of us now. Maybe I could finally be the big sister who didn't have to carry all the weight. But the more time she spent in the house, the more I noticed small things I couldn't quite ignore. Their ease with each other. Inside jokes that stopped when I walked into a room. Rachel's laughter, a little too bright, whenever Jonathan teased her. And sometimes, a hand on her shoulder or at the small of her back that lingered a second too long. I told myself it was paranoia. That I was tired. That after years of fighting for everything I had, I didn't know how to simply enjoy it. But late at night, lying awake in our California king bed while Jonathan snored softly beside me, unease coiled tighter in my chest. The turning point came one evening when I returned home earlier than expected. Jonathan and Rachel were in his study, heads bent over his laptop. They jumped apart the second I entered. Jonathan snapped the computer shut so quickly it was almost comical. "What are you two up to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Just showing Rachel some investment opportunities," Jonathan said smoothly, smiling like nothing was amiss. "For when she decides what to do next." Rachel gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just brainstorming." I nodded, forcing myself to believe it. But the unease deepened. That night, after they went to bed, I slipped back into the study. My paranoia wasn't unfounded. I had set up a security protocol when we moved in, tracking logins and network activity across the house. Jonathan's computer had accessed our joint financial accounts earlier that day, not unusual in itself. But what unsettled me was the focus of his searches. International banking regulations, offshore transfer limits, and succession planning. The next morning, I asked him directly, "Is everything okay with our finances? I noticed you were looking into large transfers." End quote. His coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. His face didn't change, but I noticed the smallest flicker in his eyes. "Just routine planning," he said easily. "With wealth like ours, we need to be strategic about asset allocation." He smiled. "Finance bores you, Amelia. Trust me to handle this part." On the surface, it was logical. Reassuring, even. But something in his dismissive tone chilled me. For the first time, I wondered if I really knew the man I'd married. I didn't let it go. Instead, I reached out to Martin Blake, a private investigator recommended by my company's former security chief. I asked him, discreetly, to look into both Jonathan and Rachel. Everything. I told him. Backgrounds, financials, anything you can find. 3 days later, Martin called. "Mrs. Hayes," he said carefully. "I've found some information you should know." I gripped the phone tighter. "Go on." "Your husband's financial history is concerning. Before he met you, Jonathan was nearly bankrupt from failed investments and gambling debts. He took out multiple high-interest loans, which were suddenly paid off shortly after your marriage." My stomach dropped. "And Rachel? She's accumulated significant credit card debt across several accounts," Martin continued. "But more troubling are the large cash deposits she's been making into an offshore account for the past 3 months. Roughly $100,000. The source of those funds is unclear." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Jonathan, the polished investor, had been drowning in debt before me. Rachel, the sister I'd always supported, was hiding money overseas. The people closest to me, the two I trusted most, were not who they seemed. I hung up the phone and sat in my office, staring out at the glittering bay beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view that once made me feel untouchable now mocked me. My entire life, I had built everything on resilience, on trust that hard work would pay off, that family and love were anchors I could rely on. Now those anchors felt like weights, dragging me into depths I wasn't sure I could escape. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. To gather more information. But deep down, a voice I couldn't silence whispered the truth. The cracks in my perfect life weren't just cracks, they were fault lines. And something catastrophic was coming. After Martin's call, sleep became a stranger to me. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed his words. Jonathan's hidden debts, Rachel's offshore account. My husband and my sister, the two people who should have been my safe harbor, suddenly looked like strangers wearing familiar faces. But suspicion wasn't enough. I needed proof, concrete evidence, something undeniable. So, I did what I had always done. I turned to technology. Under the guise of upgrading our security system, I installed hidden cameras in the common areas of the mansion, including Jonathan's study. The staff thought it was routine. Jonathan thought it was his idea. But only I knew the cameras fed into a secure server I alone could access. For the first 2 days, nothing. Footage of Jonathan taking calls, Rachel lounging by the pool, the two of them sipping wine in the kitchen while pretending to watch a movie. I almost convinced myself I was overreacting. But on the third day, my worst fears materialized. I had told Jonathan I would be gone all day for meetings in Palo Alto. In reality, I parked my car down the street, tablet in hand, connected to the live feed. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears as I watched Jonathan open a drawer in his study and pull out a folder thick with documents. Rachel leaned over his shoulder, her manicured finger pointing to a page. "Once it's done," she said, her voice calm, businesslike. "How soon can we access the funds?" Jonathan tapped the papers. "The succession plan transfers control immediately in case of death. Amelia updated her will after the acquisition, no kids, so you're the sole heir. With both documents, we'll have full legal access within days." Rachel smiled, but it wasn't the sisterly grin I knew. It was cold, sharp. "And they'll never find the body in the open ocean. Perfect accident." End quote. I nearly dropped the tablet. Jonathan nodded. "The yacht trip next week is our chance. We won't get a better one. We stage it as a fall overboard. No one questions it, not that far from shore. Tragic, but believable." The breath left my body. I stared at their faces, the husband I once thought was my anchor, the sister I had rescued time and time again, discussing my death as casually as someone might plan a vacation. For the first time in my life, I truly understood betrayal, not the subtle sting of favoritism from parents. Not the envy of being overlooked for my sister. This was betrayal in its purest, ugliest form. Two people I loved conspiring to erase me for money. I wanted to storm into that room and scream. I wanted to grab Rachel by the shoulders and shake her, to demand how she could possibly do this to me after everything I'd sacrificed for her. I wanted to look Jonathan in the eye and ask if he had ever loved me, or if I had just been a ledger entry in his plan to climb out of debt. But a deeper instinct survival kept me rooted. If I confronted them now, they might accelerate their plan. They might find another way. I couldn't show my hand. I had to be smarter. That night, I went through the motions of normal life. Dinner at the long dining table, Jonathan telling stories about his supposed business deals, Rachel swirling wine in her glass, laughing at his jokes. I smiled, nodded, played the dutiful wife and sister. But beneath the surface, I was plotting. When Jonathan suggested a second honeymoon on the yacht, I forced enthusiasm into my voice. "That sounds wonderful," I said, steady even as my pulse raced. Rachel chimed in. "He invited me too. I've always wanted to see the Mexican Riviera." Her eyes locked on mine, daring me to protest. I smiled. "Of course. The three of us will have fun." That night, while they slept, I began to prepare. I had 6 days. 6 days to plan for what was meant to be my last. The first step was contingency communication. I called my assistant, Claire, under the pretense of planning post-acquisition projects. Quietly, I slipped her a sealed envelope. "If you don't hear from me for 3 days," I said, "open this. Follow the instructions, no questions." Her eyes widened, but she nodded. Claire had worked with me long enough to know when not to pry. Next, I created a new emergency email account linked to an automated alert system. If I didn't log in within 48 hours, pre-written messages with evidence would be sent to key allies, including Martin and my lawyer. I transferred $10 million into a hidden account only I controlled, separate from the assets Jonathan knew about. Enough to disappear if I had to. Then came the physical preparation. I purchased a small waterproof pouch and filled it with survival essentials. A compact satellite phone, emergency cash, and a GPS beacon. I packed discreetly, slipping the items into my luggage beneath layers of clothing. I hid water-resistant shoes and dark athletic wear at the bottom of my suitcase, clothes Jonathan would never question, assuming they were for workouts. Every detail mattered. I wasn't just preparing to survive. I was preparing to turn their plan against them. The days leading up to the trip were a performance. I pretended to be excited, helping Rachel pick out resort wear, smiling when Jonathan kissed me goodnight, nodding as he talked about the yacht, the Azure Dream. Inside, I was screaming. But on the outside, I was serene. Years of being the overlooked sister, of hiding my own needs to keep the peace, had taught me how to wear masks. This time, that skill would save my life. On the morning of departure, As we boarded the gleaming 80-foot yacht in San Diego Harbor, my legs felt like lead. From the outside, it looked perfect: white leather interiors, a hot tub on the deck, a crew of 6 ready to cater to our every need. Jonathan wrapped his arm around my waist for the cameras, Rachel posed in oversized sunglasses, and I smiled. Every inch the image of a blissful wife. But in my chest, my heart pounded with the weight of what I knew. They thought they were leading me to my execution. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't walking blindly into their trap. I was watching, waiting, preparing. Because if they wanted to play this game, I was ready. And this time, I wasn't the safety net, I was the storm. The first few days on the yacht passed like the pages of a glossy travel magazine, at least, on the surface. We cruised south along the Mexican coast, anchoring near secluded coves and sun-drenched beaches. Jonathan played the attentive husband, bringing me cocktails on deck, rubbing sunscreen into my shoulders, and pulling me close for photos. Rachel lounged beside us in bikinis, snapping endless selfies, her laughter ringing out across the water like she hadn't a care in the world. But beneath the glamorous facade, I felt the tension thrumming like a live wire. I watched them when they thought I wasn't looking, the way Jonathan's hand brushed Rachel's back just a little too often. The way their eyes locked in silent communication. And I noticed how carefully they avoided being alone with me when crew members were nearby. The safety of witnesses kept me alive those first few days, I was sure of it. On the 4th day, Captain Rodriguez mentioned that we were more than 100 miles offshore, far from the nearest land. "Open water now," he said casually as he charted our course. I swallowed hard, the words lodging like a stone in my chest. Open water meant no chance of swimming to safety, no possibility of anyone hearing me scream. Exactly the kind of isolation Jonathan and Rachel needed. That evening, Rachel suggested the crew deserved a night off from serving us dinner. "We can manage one meal ourselves," she said sweetly, glancing at Jonathan. He agreed instantly. "They've been working hard. Let them rest." I knew then it was coming. As the sun bled orange and pink across the horizon, Jonathan handed me a drink in a tall glass garnished with pineapple. "A special recipe," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Extra strong, just how you like it." I lifted it to my lips, tipping it just enough to let the liquid slide down the side of the glass and spill into the sea below. "Delicious," I murmured, setting it down on the teak table. His attention shifted to Rachel, who was swirling her own drink dramatically, and I felt the relief of not having to choke down whatever he'd laced mine with. Over the next hour, I began my performance. I slurred my words, blinked heavily, let my body sway unsteadily when I stood. "I think I need to lie down," I muttered, stumbling toward the stairs. Jonathan was immediately at my side, his arm tightening around my waist in what looked like tenderness but felt like possession. "Let me help you, sweetheart," he said, guiding me toward the cabin. Inside, he laid me on the bed. I kept my eyes half closed, my breathing shallow, while my heart pounded like a drum. Jonathan waved his hand in front of my face, called my name, snapped his fingers. When I didn't respond, he left, locking the door behind him. I waited 15 minutes, forcing my body to remain still even as adrenaline screamed at me to move. Finally, I crept to the door and pressed my ear to the wood. Through the yacht's ventilation system, I heard their voices from the deck above. "Is she out?" Rachel asked. "Completely," Jonathan replied, his tone flat. "I used enough sedative to knock out someone twice her size. She won't wake up even when we move her." Rachel laughed softly, a sound that chilled me more than the ocean wind ever could. "Good. The crew's distracted. We have at least an hour." I slipped back into bed, pulling the waterproof pouch from under my shirt. The GPS beacon blinked faintly, activated and ready. My water-resistant shoes were laced tight, my dark athletic clothes clinging to my body. I was prepared for this. But nothing could truly prepare me for what came next. Footsteps approached. The door unlocked. Jonathan entered, Rachel close behind. Her eyes glittered with something I didn't recognize anymore, something colder than envy, sharper than resentment. "Time to move her," Jonathan said, his voice all business. "Remember, it needs to look like she was drunk or sleepwalking. Accidental fall. No questions asked." Rachel stepped closer, gazing down at me. For a moment, I wondered if she'd hesitate, if the bond of blood would pull her back from the edge. But her lips curved into a smirk I had never seen before. I sat up suddenly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Looking for something? They froze. Jonathan's eyes widened, then narrowed as his mask slipped. Rachel's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Priscilla, Jonathan started. But I cut him off. Don't. I heard everything. The plan. The will. The money. All of it. For a heartbeat, silence. Then Rachel laughed, low and bitter. Of course you figured it out. You've always been the smart one, haven't you? Always one step ahead. Always perfect Amelia, with her billion-dollar company, and her perfect life. Jonathan recovered quickly, his face hardening into something predatory. This changes nothing, he said, advancing. You were never supposed to hear this, but you won't be around to repeat it. I backed toward the door, but Rachel slipped behind me, blocking my escape. Her eyes burned into mine, no trace of the sister who once held my hand on the first day of school. Do you know what it's like, she hissed, to spend your whole life in someone's shadow? To always be the charity case, the one who needs saving? I deserve some of what you have. We share the same blood. So, you decided to spill that blood for money? My voice cracked with disbelief. Enough talking. Jonathan snapped, lunging. I dodged, sending him crashing into the bedside table. I darted past Rachel, sprinting toward the deck. My lungs burned as I screamed, help. But the crew was below, the roar of the engines swallowing my voice. Jonathan tackled me from behind, his weight crushing the air from my chest. Hold her. He barked. Rachel grabbed my wrists, her nails digging into my skin. I fought with everything I had, landing a kick to Jonathan's stomach that made him double over. For a brief moment, I broke free. I scrambled toward the railing, thinking if I jumped now, the crew might notice me on the other side of the yacht. But Jonathan was faster. He yanked my hair, jerking me backward so hard I saw stars. Together, he and Rachel dragged me to the edge. My fingers clawed at their arms, my nails leaving bloody streaks on Jonathan's cheek. I turned to Rachel one last time, searching desperately for a trace of the sister I once knew. Please, I gasped. We're family. Her face hardened into stone. She leaned close, her breath hot against my ear. Say hi to the sharks for me, Amy. Then she shoved. The impact was brutal, the ocean hitting me like concrete. Pain shot through my back as the cold swallowed me whole. Water surged into my nose and mouth as I sank beneath the surface, the roar of the yacht's engines vibrating through the depths. Instinct screamed. Swim. I kicked hard, breaking the surface with a gasp that tore at my throat. The yacht's lights blurred in the distance, shrinking as Jonathan and Rachel sailed away, leaving me for dead. For one dizzying moment, panic clawed at me. I was alone. 100 miles from shore. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, black and merciless. But then I remembered who I was. I wasn't just the forgotten sister. I wasn't just their target. I was a survivor. I had prepared for this. I reached for the waterproof pouch under my shirt. My hands trembling but steady enough to press the GPS beacon until it blinked stronger. The tiny light was my lifeline, sending a signal into the void. Whether anyone would find me was uncertain. But I would not give up. I rolled onto my back, slipping into a relaxed backstroke, conserving energy. My years as a competitive swimmer came flooding back the rhythm of breath, the economy of movement. My muscles screamed, my teeth chattered, but my mind clung to one thought. Survive. Live. Make them pay. The yacht vanished into the darkness, carrying away my betrayers. But they hadn't destroyed me. Not yet. And as the stars shimmered above the endless black water, I swore to myself that they never would. The ocean became both my enemy and my only witness. Every second in that black water stretched into eternity. The cold gnawed at my bones, salt burned my throat, and the endless horizon mocked me with its emptiness. I floated on my back when I could, forcing my body into a rhythm. Breathe, kick, glide. I told myself not to think about sharks, not to think about how far the shore was. I told myself only this. One more minute. Then another. Survive the next breath, the next wave. Hours bled together. My limbs ached, numbness crept into my fingers and toes, and my jaw chattered so hard I thought my teeth might crack. I don't know how long I fought before I spotted it, a cushion bobbing in the waves, probably thrown overboard during the struggle. It was small, pathetic even, but to me it was salvation. I clung to it, wrapping my arms around the sodden fabric, letting it hold my head above water when my muscles threatened to fail. By dawn, the sky had softened into gray, and I was barely holding on. My lips were cracked, my body racked with shivers. When I first heard the distant hum of a motor, I thought it was hallucination. But then I saw it. A small fishing boat, cutting across the waves half a mile away. Desperation gave me strength. I waved the cushion wildly, screamed until my throat tore. At first, the boat kept moving, oblivious. Then I remembered the GPS beacon. I pressed the strobe function, the tiny light flashing against the rising sun. The boat changed direction. They had seen me. 2 men pulled me aboard minutes later, a middle-aged fisherman with weathered skin and a younger man, his son. They spoke a rapid mix of Spanish and English, their faces etched with disbelief. Dios mío. A woman? Here? I croaked one word. Help before my body gave in. When I woke hours later, I was wrapped in blankets in their cabin. The older man introduced himself as Captain Luis Rivera, his son Marco hovering nearby with worried eyes. They gave me sips of water, treated the salt sores on my skin, and asked how I had ended up in the middle of the Pacific. Accident, I rasped. Fell. Yacht. They didn't press. Maybe they didn't believe me, but they saw enough of the truth in my shaking hands and hollow eyes to let the details wait. Captain Rivera only said, "You are safe now. We take you to shore." Safe. The word felt foreign. Because even as gratitude swelled in me, I knew the reality. I wasn't safe. Not yet. Jonathan and Rachel thought I was gone. And for now, that illusion was my only weapon. When we docked in a small fishing village in Mexico, I paid them with the emergency cash from my pouch. More than they expected. Enough to buy their silence. "Tell no one you found me," I begged. Luis hesitated, then nodded. His son promised he would say nothing. For good measure, I gave them a number to contact later. "If anyone asks about me, you never saw me." From there, I vanished. I rented a modest hotel room under an alias. Patricia Lane dyed my hair black, wore sunglasses even indoors. The mirror showed a stranger. Sunburned skin, hollow cheeks, haunted eyes. Perfect. No one could connect me to the woman splashed across headlines as the billionaire tech CEO tragically lost at sea. M6. On the hotel's dusty computer, I logged into the emergency email account. Claire had already opened the envelope I left behind. Her message nearly brought me to tears. "Amelia, thank God. I prayed you were alive. Jonathan and Rachel reported you missing. The Coast Guard called off the search after 2 days. Jonathan even gave a press conference crying, holding Rachel's hand. The world thinks you're dead. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Endo." I stared at her words, a mix of rage and sorrow boiling inside me. Jonathan, the grieving widower. Rachel, the devastated sister. Performing grief while planning how to spend my fortune. They thought they had won. But they had underestimated me. I typed back instructions carefully. Secure communications only, discreet contact with people I trusted. Access to funds they couldn't trace. And above all, silence. No one could know I had survived. One by one, my allies gathered. Claire Morgan, my loyal assistant, became my lifeline on the ground. She funneled me information, managed logistics, and acted as my public shadow while I remained hidden. David Lin, a brilliant cybersecurity expert who had worked at Neurowell, joined us remotely. His skills were unmatched when it came to recovering deleted data, tracing digital breadcrumbs, and securing our communications. Samuel Brooks, the private investigator who had uncovered Jonathan's debts, became our eyes and ears. He tracked Jonathan and Rachel's movements, documented their spending, and gathered evidence from their past. Together, we formed a secret team not to comfort me, not to rescue me, but to prepare for war. The first blows came quickly. David recovered fragments of deleted emails between Jonathan and Rachel, dating back to before my marriage. Reading their words made me physically ill. "The engagement is set." She said yes. Of course she did. My sister always wanted what she could never have. Be nice. She's our ticket. After the company sells, a tragic accident. I can be patient. For a billion reasons. Every "I love you," Jonathan had ever whispered. Every tear Rachel had ever shed at my wedding, they were rehearsals. Lies wrapped in affection. Meanwhile, Samuel uncovered financial records. Offshore transfers. Fraudulent signatures. They were already draining my accounts, purchasing cars, jewelry, even a down payment on a vacation home. And worse, Jonathan was researching countries without extradition treaties. They were planning to run. Claire worked tirelessly to manage the legal front. With my lawyer, she identified irregularities in the documents Jonathan had filed since my death. Signatures forged in my name. Succession clauses activated with suspicious speed. Each discovery was another nail in their coffin, but evidence wasn't enough. I didn't just want to expose them. I wanted to control the narrative. I wanted to return not as a broken victim but as the architect of their downfall. So I began to plan. In my small Mexican hotel room, I sketched out scenarios. How to confront them. How to reveal the truth in a way no one could deny. My team met through encrypted channels, our faces glowing on screens late into the night. This isn't about revenge, I told them. It's about justice. They need to face consequences not just for me, but for everyone else they might hurt. David nodded. We'll bury them in evidence. Samuel leaned back in his chair. With what I've found, they'll never see freedom again. Claire, her voice steady but her eyes wet, said. Just promise me you'll be careful. They won't hesitate to try again. I promised. But in my heart, I knew the danger hadn't passed. Jonathan was a predator. Rachel was his accomplice. They had already tried once, and they would not stop willingly. Which meant I had to be the one to stop them. As weeks passed, the world mourned me. News anchors replayed Jonathan's press conference, showing his practiced tears. Rachel stood beside him, a picture of grief, dabbing her eyes with tissues. My sister was everything to me, she told reporters. I don't know how to go on without her. Watching from my hotel, I almost laughed. Almost screamed. If I hadn't felt her hands shoving me into the sea, I might have believed her. But I had something stronger than grief. Stronger than fear. I had survived. And now, I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing to return. Not as Amelia Carter, the overlooked sister. Not as the naive wife who believed in love. But as the storm they never saw coming. I would rise not as their victim, but as the architect of their justice. 3 months after Jonathan and Rachel left me for dead, I walked back into my own mansion. Not as their wife or sister, not as their victim, but as the woman they had underestimated. My team and I staged everything carefully. The dining room table was set for 3, candles flickering, wine glasses filled. At the center sat a beautifully wrapped box, not with a gift, but with the evidence of their crimes. The hidden recordings, the emails, the financial documents, the arrest warrants already signed. When they stumbled through the door, fresh from another vacation funded by my stolen money, their laughter died instantly. Their eyes fell on the table, then on me, stepping into the light in the very same dress I had worn the night they tried to kill me. Jonathan's face drained of color. Rachel's mouth fell open in a silent scream. You're dead, Jonathan whispered. No. I said softly, my voice steady. You saw me fall. But you never saw me drown. For a moment, chaos reigned. Jonathan lunged, knocking the table sideways, glass shattering across the floor. He grabbed a knife, fury twisting his features, but within seconds, the doors burst open and law enforcement swarmed the room. They had been waiting outside, ready for my signal. Jonathan fought, cursing, threatening, while Rachel collapsed into sobs, trying to blame him, trying to claw her way into sympathy. It didn't matter. The evidence was airtight. The trials were swift, the headlines merciless. Jonathan was sentenced to 30 years without parole for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Rachel, who had tried to cooperate with prosecutors at the last moment, still received 15 years. I sat in the courtroom for both sentencings, staring at them without hate, without forgiveness, only a steady resolve that this chapter of my life was finished. But survival wasn't enough. I knew if I stopped there, the ocean would always own me, their betrayal would always define me. So I rebuilt not my old life, but a new one, forged from everything I had endured. I launched the Phoenix Foundation, dedicated to helping women betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love them, whether financially, emotionally, or both. We provided legal aid, therapy, and emergency funds for women trying to escape toxic, controlling relationships. My story became the cornerstone of the mission. Proof that destruction could be turned into rebirth. The day I stood before our first group of beneficiaries, I told them the truth. The ocean didn't drown me. Their betrayal didn't destroy me. Both forced me to rise stronger. On my own terms. I am not the woman who once believed love was protection, or that family meant loyalty. That woman died in the Pacific the night my sister whispered, "Say hi to the sharks." What remains is someone sharper, stronger, and freer than I ever imagined I could be. And for the first time in my life, I am no one's safety net. I am my own foundation. Looking back on everything I endured, the betrayal, the cold waters of the Pacific, the fight to rebuild, I realized the greatest lesson isn't about revenge or even justice, but about resilience. Life will test us in ways we cannot imagine, often through the people we trust most. I believed love and family would always protect me, and when that belief was shattered, I thought I was too. But survival taught me otherwise. Pain and betrayal are not the end. They are the beginning of transformation. What nearly destroyed me forced me to discover my own strength, to stop living as someone else's safety net, and to rise on my own terms. The truth is, we cannot control what others do, their envy, their greed, their cruelty. What we can control is how we respond, how we refuse to let their choices define us. The ocean didn't drown me, and betrayal didn't destroy me. Both became the fire that forged me into who I am today, and that is the lesson I carry forward. We are often stronger than we believe, and sometimes it takes being broken to discover just how unbreakable we really are. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.